Hello students. This video is going to be attached to the November 27th class focused on Model Builder. So this will be one of probably 2 or 3 videos for the virtual component of this week's class. And really what they're going to center around is what's called Model Builder in ArcGIS Pro. So this very colorful, sort of kid pixie Microsoft Paint looking thing here is called Model Builder. And it's essentially where you are using these shapes that are representative of data, shape files, tables, and tools, and connecting them in such a way that you can run multiple operations simultaneously, from a single tool. So in this instance, what we'll do today is we're going to create 2 buffers, one from regional rail stations and one from the parks. We're going to take those 2 buffers and we're going to intersect them so we can bring back only the areas that are, within 2 miles of both a park and a regional rail station. Then we are going to take that output and we're going to summarize that area, that meets sort of both those criteria. We're going to summarize some population within them, and we're going to ultimately sort of spit that out. So, really what we're accomplishing here would be, typically run through 4 different operations. You'd run a buffer, you'd load them in intersect, you'd load them into summarize, and you get this. But if you're going to be running all these operations simultaneously, you can build a model that strings them together. So that's the basics of what we'll sort of learn, today. But Model Builder, certainly more advanced than just that. Beyond the ability to string together processes for, analytics that you are, doing at your desktop, you can also use Model Builder to create what are called parameterized models, which is where there's a series of inputs that any user can input, right? This model right here would only run with the data we've loaded for it, but we'll learn how to sort of transform something like this into a model that actually looks like a tool from a toolbox that you could share with anyone else. And then finally, we'll come in and we'll do a little bit of more of the advanced Model Builder in the last video, namely through this concept of iterators that you see sort of up here on the Model Builder window. And iterators are really cool. Iterators essentially allow you to move through multiple discrete pieces of data and run the same operation for them, or run through the different feature parts of a single shapefile and run a bunch of different operations. So it's one of the coolest tools for Model Builder, and it's a huge time saver when you have a lot of data that you have to do the same or similar process to. You can build it into sort of a model and just let it iterate. Okay, so before we get there, if you're going to follow along, the sort of demo data, I've got regional rail stations, parks, and Philadelphia blocks. You're going to want to make sure we load that all into a map. Again, this first video, we're going to build our model, and then sort of run it with our desktop window open. So anytime you're going to build a new model, you want to store it in a toolbox. And so that's the first step before you build anything with Model Builder, is you'd want to right-click in your catalog, whatever area, whatever folder you're working out of, and go into New, and then come in down here to sort of Toolbox. So this will be for November 27th class, or I'll call it, November 27th TBX for Toolbox. And now I've created the container that will hold the model. So come for another right click and come here to New. And there you have sort of the various things you can load. Students that go a little bit farther than where we learn in the intro course, the toolbox is also where you would store Python scripts using the ArcPy site package. That would allow you to go even deeper than what we can do here with Model Builder and start to build really sort of customized tools for usage in ArcGIS Pro. But we're going to keep it simple here with just a model. Again, you're going to get that really clean graphic user interface that lets you use shapes to represent different shape files, different tools, so on and so forth. So let's come on in here. We're going to create a model. Notice that it sort of pops up as its own window model. For now, we can X that out. And we'll just sort of click on it in here and, maybe make it, multi-buffer summary, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to summarize two different things. We're going to buffer two different things, and then we're going to summarize them. All right, so in order to actually, mess with the model, you don't go to open, you come here to edit. And that'll open it up in sort of this separate window. I really like when I'm teaching this to kind of make it, I like dragged it away, because I want us to be able to sort of build this while we're able to sort of see the window in front of us. All right, so the moment you have a model opened up or you clicked on the window, the model builder tool, the model builder, toolbar will pop up with all the sort of various buttons and elements to run. We won't do most of these, and I think a lot of them won't become really clear until we start loading some stuff into here. So that's what we'll do to start, is I really want you to just grab regional rails and drag it in. And I want you to grab parks, and I want you to drag it in. And I want you to drag blocks, and I want you to drag it in. Now, what we've done here is not the only way to get elements into Model Builder, but when you're starting to use it and learn how it works, I really recommend this as the way that you begin. Treat it first like a compendium to your map. Have a model open and have it really linking and connecting back to active layers that are open in a map, just because it makes it a little bit easier than building something that's totally sort of blank from start. So as I would say in class, kindergarten level observation, we have these sort of darker blue circles here, which are representative typically of shapefiles or data types, but as inputs. So we now kind of have all of our inputs. I can operate this like any map. I can click them and drag them. I can resize them and reshape them if I want to. You can come up here and zoom in and out. You can select certain ones just like you would, in any other sort of map here. I can fit it to my window. Your call. They're just sort of, oh dear, what have I done, Shay? Fit to the window. They're just sort of navigational tools that let you sort of play around with your various data sets. So I've got the data that I want to play with here. They're coming in as sort of circles to start. But what I want to be doing, right, if we're really trying to build something like this, we want to sort of clearly get this model. I've dragged in my data and it's showing up blue, but now I need to be able to actually link it towards certain tools. And that's the next step that we're able to do. And the cleanest way to do this is you really just kind of come to this little toolbox here and you can search what you want to do, right? I want to run a buffer. So I'll click on the buffer, double click it, and there is the buffer, right? Suddenly I have my buffer tool. It comes right in here. But notice what's different between this and what we had in sort of the sample, what we're ultimately going to be creating right here, is those are kind of colored in, whereas this is gray. And all Model Builder is doing to you there is sort of signaling that it needs an input. And the cool thing with Model Builder is once you drag in a tool, where it shows up as that square, when you double click on it and you open it up, you'll see that it's going to operate just like any other tool, right? It requires a certain number of inputs, these things with red. Everything else is sort of optional. And until it gets those inputs, it's not going to be able to run. So we really have got to kind of give it its sort of inputs to get it connected and to make it work. Now, I could just double click and load the data here. But something that I think is really fun about Model Builder is when you sort of grab one thing and drag it into the other. And the cool thing is when you do that, when you connect a shapefile or a data layer to a tool, it's going to run some stuff behind the scenes to sort of try to ask you what you think or what it thinks that it is. And in this instance, I know it's going to be the input feature because it's the thing I want to buffer. But there's two other things that it can often be. Sometimes you can connect something as an extent. And in that instance, I'd be saying like, hey, this buffer is going to run on something else. But when you export sort of the buffer rings, make sure it doesn't get any bigger than the extent of Scepter Regional Rail. Precondition is something that we'll maybe talk about a bit if we sort of choose to when we come back from Thanksgiving break and look at some more advanced model builder techniques. A precondition is when you have many, many different sort of rows and levels of a model you're building, and you're anxious that, a step far in the future might not work until it gets, an earlier input. You could make something a precondition. So we could say like, hey, utool can't run, until Scepter Regional Rail is created. But that's more advanced. For right now, I'll just make it sort of an input feature. So it's still not ready to go, right? So I'm going to come in here, and it's going to need to know still a few things, right? Just like we would on our computer. We've got the sense here that the output feature class is going to go right to our geodatabase. We got our input, but we still need to pick sort of a distance value. So why don't we come in here and we'll make it a linear unit. We'll make it 2 miles. And I want you to also dissolve these into a single feature, just because I don't really need the individual, buffers for each of the rail stations. I just want to know like what's within 2 miles of a regional rail, what's within 2 miles of a park, and then I'm going to bring those together to actually do a summary. So we'll dissolve them all into a single feature. Hit OK, and then we're golden, right? So what this is telling me is if I were to come and run this, it would take regional rails that I have in my map here, and it would buffer it, and it would output this thing right here. So you're just going to kind of do the same concept for the one below it. So we'll take the buffer, and this is my stylistic choice. But notice when I'm building this, I'm kind of keeping things in line with one another. That's just the way that I like to organize it. When you play around with Model Builder, you can sort of choose your own way. Excuse me, to load your data. So, got both of my things buffered. Now, if we return back to what our design was here, right, we wanted to buffer both the shapes, and the next thing we want to do is we want to intersect them. So we've actually got to bring them together, take the 2 buffered shapes, and bring it into sort of a single thing that we are able to then intersect and then summarize the Philadelphia block population. So similar before, we'll just kind of come into our tools and we'll search and bring in an intersect and double click it. It can sit here. We'll put it right at the end of our 2 files. And, we can go in sort of multiple ways here. We can, either sort of drag each in as an input feature, or we could have double clicked on the tool. It's always nice to double click on the tool, just check, hey, is there any other things I need to sort of have here? Now I've got an output. I'm comfortable with that name. It's just going to go to my geodatabase. All my attributes are going to say, and I want it to remain the same as my input. I want it to be a polygon. So something cool happened here, even if we don't realize it. But we've buffered 2 things. They've each created an individual buffer, and then they're going to combine themselves in intersect. If I were to right-click on the green blobs, and sort of once we get this first video introduced and done and show how it works, second video we'll do a little bit of right-clicking just to explore a little bit more about some options, for how to customize the feature inputs, the tools, and everything. But I do think this one's an important one to note. The moment an output, which is green, right? Anything in green is an output. The moment an output is used as an input to a new tool, it automatically calls itself intermediate data. And that's an important concept for Model Builder. If you were to come up to, where is it? Maybe it's not in properties. I have to remind myself exactly sort of where you change this. We'll sort of have this as the start of next video. But there's a way with the properties of your with your toolbox or with your sort of model where you can sort of change and you can alter how long intermediate data, remains a thing. Because what intermediate data means is that it's coding the data in such a way, even though it's storing itself in my, geodatabase, I think it's sort of the standard is like 2 or 3 weeks or something, it's going to delete itself after that time frame. So intermediate data will exist, it'll be created, it'll go into your database, but it'll ultimately disappear. And that's a neat concept, right? I'm creating data that's intermediate, that's really used just to flow into something else, and that ultimately will sort of disappear within sort of a set time frame. That itself is going to be an interesting concept on a later video when we talk about how we take a model like this, which is completely linked to the data, right? I dragged stuff in to populate it. I'm sort of dragging it, to sort of connect to other tools. What would happen to intermediate data, these things we don't really need, if I didn't have this? If I was just creating sort of blank circles where a user could load anything they wanted, what would I do with this sort of data? How would I ensure that it doesn't go to, my geodatabase, which no one else's computer would have a record for? And how do I ensure that, that data sort of removes itself? So that's a concept we're going to explore a little further in the next video. But for this one, we're almost done, right? I have taken these two, I have buffered each of them 2 miles, I've dissolved their buffers, I've intersected them. And now all I really want to do is I want to summarize, right? I want to sort of summarize this data, the population data, within this new feature class that I have, which is the intersection of the buffers. So I'll come up here and I'll type in summarize within, bring it in. It's got 2 potential outputs it might create for me depending on what I put as the input. And here we go, right? I'll show you 2 ways to do it. You can kind of come in here and we'll actually load it from double clicking the tool at this point. Okay, so the polygons, right? What is the area that I'm going to perform the summary for? Well, that's going to be this intersected buffer here. So this thing here that we've called output feature class, that is the intersection, right? So that's what's going to be the ultimate summary. You can see it's sort of a model variable, meaning I've loaded it into this model window here. So I'm going to say connect output feature class. That's going to be sort of what, the polygon that does the summary. And what am I going to summarize? I'm going to summarize Philadelphia blocks. Here's an interesting thing. You can see Philadelphia blocks in 2 different places. Philadelphia blocks here means we've already dragged it into the model. Versus if I were to do this one, it's going to come directly from the map. So the tool will run the same, but it'll just create a funny tool where I have Philadelphia blocks twice because I've already sort of dragged it in and made it a model variable. So I'm going to summarize Philadelphia blocks within those areas. This is my output. This is going to be my final output. So, maybe I'll come here and give it an easier name here. I'll call it something like population in multi-buffer. And then let's just summarize a few things. And this is neat, right? The moment that I've connected the data to it, even though the lines aren't drawn, it's already reading from population block. So it knows I can summarize population. It can summarize the number of people that own and the number of people that rent and keep them as a sum for each. And then I don't really need shape summary attributes, and I don't need a grouped field. So I'll hit OK, and look at that. Automatically, the lines are drawn. I got each of my sort of elements here. And this would now become intermediate data because it's connected. So now I really have kind of the end result of my tool. I'm going to buffer these 2 things. I'm going to intersect them, and then I'm going to summarize Philadelphia population within that area. So one last thing you might want to do, because this is your final output, this is the thing you actually really want, a trick to do here is to right-click it and say Add to Display. So what you're actually telling your map now is that you want it to show up. Arc, because it's Arc, sometimes this won't work even though you hit Add to Display. So I found that sometimes if it doesn't, just like right-clicking again and turning it on and off will usually get it to show in the display. So I'm going to make sure my model is selected. I'm going to save my model. And then I'm really going to come here and run. And I want you to sort of pay attention as the model's going. Take a look at sort of the way things are sort of shaded as we move through. So I'm going to run it. It's going to go, buffer, it's doing its first buffer. Notice the sort of window is telling me it's working through that sort of part of it. All right, it's exceeded the buffer. It's exceeded the other buffer. It's now intersecting. The intersecting's done. It's doing the summarize within. And eventually, summarize within always takes a second, right? Because you're sort of cracking the features. Always takes a little longer than my ability to stall for time. So we'll just sort of wait a second here while it finishes up. All good. It's all done. Population and multi-buffer. Something was added to the map. We'll investigate it in a second. You've got your tool window here that you can come through and sort of see how all the processes worked. And I think the other cool thing that you see is that any place that worked has a shade under it. And that's really helpful, that if you start running tools that are really, really long and there's an error at some point, you'll notice that like right before where the error happened, everything is shaded up to that point. So helpful thing, sort of tells me where my outputs came from Model Builder. So I could come in here and I could open the attribute table. And there we go, right? I got my uniform buffer for all those shapes, and this tells me the total population, the total that owned, and the total that sort of rented in there. So something that normally would have taken a number of different steps to achieve, I'm able to get it done pretty quickly here through a combination of sort of intersecting, and buffering, and then running kind of my summary. And that's the basics of Model Builder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this first video just because this one's sort of gone on for a bit. And then we'll pick back up and start to dissect this model a little bit more, really kind of asking a question like, how would you do the same thing if you didn't already have data? If I just wanted to build a tool that was like this, that my user could load 2 of anything to buffer, and what my tool would do is intersect it, and then my user could load something to summarize, and it would summarize that data. How do I build something like that gives the user the ability to control what the inputs are?